You're in the kitchen.
Welcome to another kitchen conversation. Today we have Collin Johns, the #1 rated pickleball doubles player in the world. Is it just doubles?
Just
Or are
men's
you number
doubles.
one in the world?
Just men's
Just
doubles.
men's doubles. Okay, just men's doubles. That's because you're not playing singles, right? Is that right?
Yes, I retired from singles.
Otherwise, you'd be #1 overall.
Oh, I don't know
I,
about that.
I know who the real power player is in that teamwork. No, so thank you for joining us. Great to have you. I want to say that thanks to our sponsor Electrum for this kitchen conversation. Obviously, you play with Electrum, and there's some big news. I think that this week you picked up a new paddle that they're about to release to the public, the Model E Elite. Did you play the whole tournament with that, or was that just starting to toy with it?
I was just starting to toy with it, but yeah, first off, just thanks for having me on, and I'm sure we'll explore a lot of different things. It's definitely the paddle is the highest one here, but the Electrum Model E Elite is supposed to come out here in the coming weeks, and I'm really excited about it. I just got mine this week, so I wasn't quite comfortable enough to play all my matches with it. I experimented, played a couple matches with it, and decided to go with Old Trusty just for this event, potentially next week. But then once I have a little bit of downtime and I can fully acclimate to it, I'm really excited with what they've developed.
Awesome. Yeah, so you and your brother, obviously, the most dominating duo out there probably ever. I don't know if I've been around long enough to declare that, but it sure feels like that. You've won 4 of the first 5 in 2023. The only one you did not win together was because you guys decided not to play. But you guys are just, it's seemingly, it's looking easy. Are you feeling that way? How does it feel? Is it all clicking?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things coming together for us where we're always working on things, and certainly in past years, accumulating experience. I think that's a big thing at the highest level is the experienced players tend to win more, and even the players that are less experienced still have quite a bit of experience. So I think it's a lot of things. Certainly developing some new shots. Ben and I get better as a team, so we have a really good understanding of what we're trying to do as a team, and you see the same teams over and over. So getting a feel for playing certain teams. So for example, we played Matt and Riley in the final almost every tournament, it feels like. And um, when you play a team that many times and you know what you need to do to be successful, I feel like you can go into those matches with a better game plan and feel more comfortable. Whereas people that don't typically play together with a new pairing, you might have some different things coming at you. You might know their games, but you don't know how they fit together as a team. But I feel like we've never felt better as a team, me and Ben, where we know what our roles are. We've added some new shots, and it just feels really good to win this 5th straight in this last tournament in Austin. So it was Masters to start the year. Then we had 2 in Arizona. Ben didn't play in Minneapolis, and then we won in Florida and Austin. So 5 in a row. We
Oh,
didn't
so
even
5 in a row.
we didn't even. I mean, we were going to try to win every single tournament, but we were like, hey, 5 in a row. That would be amazing. So it's been a dream start to the year, and really couldn't be more excited about it.
How much are you guys running plays per se? Like, I know I see some shake and bakes, I see some, but are you guys really hitting a spot and moving around? Are we seeing that kind of coordination in pickleball at that level?
Yes, certainly when you're playing with the same partner, and Ben and I have been playing together and strategizing together for years now. So we are able to run more set plays, combinations, things like that, to where it's not even necessarily a run play, but it's just pattern recognition where Ben sees me wind up on a certain ball. He knows that realistically, probability wise, I'm probably going to speed the ball up in a certain spot, which he can then move to a different spot. And we almost never hang each other out to dry, where we hit the ball to a spot where the other one is not expecting it. And I think that that's something that makes us really hard to play, is we're very disciplined about that, where a lot of other teams move the ball around maybe to spots that are awkward for the opponents, but it also creates problems for their team because you put yourself out of position. It's something that is a little bit overlooked because it looks like a good shot, but it's not the disciplined shot. And I would say that that's probably one of the biggest factors for our success.
Well, I know a little bit about not being disciplined. And it's funny because I come from a basketball background, and I always played hero ball, right? That was the way I played. I was a decent athlete. I would go for the tough shot. And in pickleball, I had to unlearn all that. I still haven't done it, but trying to not hit the fancy shot, trying not to hit the one that's going to get all the accolades, right? The highlight reel. And it's funny because we actually had a chance to play Ben the other day, and he said, he was kidding around and said, I'm a human highlight reel, but really he's not. He hits the shot he's supposed to hit. He does it incredibly well, but you guys you stay within the game, and that is so hard. That puts so much pressure on the opponent. It's remarkable, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and sort of something I've been thinking about recently. Something like a metaphor for pickleball would be volleyball or even basketball, because I'll be the first one to admit that Ben is the best player in the world, and he's my partner, but it's a team sport. So it's not about how good one individual player is. It's certainly a huge factor in how good the team is. But if you're on LeBron James' team, it's not your job to score. It's your job to set up LeBron James. So that's how we've developed our team. And it's not that I can't pull the trigger when necessary. It's that I know I have the best attacker in the game next to me. So why would I force a shot at all when I can set him up on 2 or 3 shots later to probably hit a better attack than what I could hit? So it's all about knowing how to pass the ball and play setter and hitter. That's where the volleyball metaphor comes into play. And I actually had a great conversation with Casey Patterson about this, and the parallels between beach volleyball and pickleball seem to be enormous. So that's something I enjoyed talking to him about. And I think it's a little bit overlooked because everyone's like, well, this player is really good or this player is really good. But it's about the team unit. It's the strength of the team unit. Because unless you're playing singles, that's what it is. It's 2 versus 2. It's not this player is this good, this player is that good. I think that part is definitely something people should pay attention to more when they're creating their teams. It's part of the reason JW and Dylan play well together. And someone like, let's just say Declan and JW did very well, but their games don't necessarily maybe mesh as well as Dylan and JW's.
For sure. Yeah, and I think it takes a ton of confidence to recognize that, right? Yeah. I think that, right side, left side players, there's a bit of a, I don't want to say a stigma, but there's definitely, there's the alpha, mm-hmm. and that I think is hard for some people to accept being that. It's Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan conversation, right?
Yeah.
But if you're able to do it better than anyone in the world, there's no reason to try to be something else.
Exactly. Yeah. If your system works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm of that philosophy. So until somebody can beat our system, I don't think that we're going to change all that much. And clearly, we won 5 tournaments in a row to start the year, and everyone, for the most part, knows what's coming. Not on maybe every single ball that's hit, but they know what our strategy is. They know that we're going to play by the book. We're going to play solid fundamentals. We're going to try to prolong points. It's well known that we play well the longer the point goes, but we sort of dare you to pull the trigger in positions that are probably not advantageous to you in the long run. And you might look good for a game or a game and a half, but we feel like the percentages are in our favor if we hit the right shot at the right time with our skill set.
Yeah, last week in the finals, you guys were taking, I think it was 12-10 that you won the first game against Riley and Matt. When they were up 10-9 serving, and you defend that, you come back to win it, and it just feels like they're dead. It just feels like there's no way. You can't come back from that. They had their opportunity, and you guys just, it's that consistent, it's that steadiness, and it just feels demoralizing to the opponent when you know that it's going to keep coming.
Yes.
And yeah, I don't even have a question to that. I just feel like it's an observation that I saw it happen. I saw the look on their face. It felt like that's it. It's over.
Yeah, and certainly as a competitor, you pick up on that where you feel like they were that disappointed to not get that game. And it's something that we've played against them in the past in similar situations, and we feel that little let down in some cases where I think they were up 10-1 in Atlanta last year and 9-0 in the other Atlanta, and we were able to win both of those games and come back. So the way that we play, we're able to string a lot of points together when we start to execute well. So we're never out of it, and we know that, and I think they know that. So once they see that opportunity slip, it makes it that much harder for them to recover from that. And not that they're not trying, but it's just natural to have a little bit of a letdown. And that's where you really got to step on the gas in that next game. And I think we went out to like a 7-0 lead in this last tournament in Austin after that first game. And it was palpable, the energy that went down from them, and we gained it. And I think we did a good job of carrying that into that second game, where if it's not that way and they're able to get out to a lead, I think that's a much harder match.
So that brings me to something that we had talked about before we started this conversation about rally scoring versus side out scoring. And you talk about that momentum, right? The runs that you have in pickleball. I know you're playing MLP this week, uses rally scoring. It's a pretty different experience. Obviously, it makes everything really exciting. Every game comes down to a very tight finish. It's great for the spectators. How do the players feel about rally scoring, and do you see that ever being something that we'll see on tour, on a PPA tour, for instance?
Yeah, you're going to have definitely various answers for different players. Myself, I'm in the camp of I like pickleball the way it is, and I think that it's grown enormously. So why are we trying to change something that I don't feel like is broken? I feel like we're jumping the gun a little bit. Now, I do understand that, yes, if you're going to the Olympics or it's going to be on TV in a given time slot, I understand the advantages of rally scoring. So I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think people are maybe pushing it a little bit too soon because they're pointing to other sports that maybe were further along in their development. And certainly I don't know all the history regarding that. But my thought is pickleball is really unique in the sense that it's a game of runs, where beach volleyball used to be like that from my understanding. And I don't know how the momentum played into it, but certainly in pickleball, you'll see more strategic play because it's a little bit slower. And just because they're not points showing up on the scoreboard, I don't think that the fans are necessarily getting bored. I think it can almost be even more interesting, especially for a diehard pickleball fan, where you start to see strategic adjustments, or the serving team, after they get stuck on a number, they have to call a timeout. You have a little bit more time to get a feel for what's going on. All right, I've never played this guy before. He's hurting me with this shot. Let's keep it away from that. Whereas in rally scoring, even though you're playing to a higher number, everything is very accelerated because both teams are accumulating points faster. Just because of the nature of the rules, the two bounce rule, where the returner has a big advantage, they're naturally going to score points simply by virtue of them being the returning team. The advantage of the returning team outweighs the advantage of one team being better. You have to be miles better than somebody to blow somebody out in rally scoring. So like you just said, in MLP, all the matches are exciting because they're, in my mind, what I call arbitrarily close. Because a team that you would probably beat in a normal scoring 11-4, 11-4 is probably going to get to at least, 15 points. And then if you struggle to score that last point on 20 because you're frozen and they're not, they're going to get to 18. And now essentially we're playing to 3 or 4 or whatever it ends up being. But normally that team is not going to get within 3 points of your score. And then it comes down to things that sometimes can be outside of your control. Maybe they get a let cord. Maybe there's a tough call that goes against you. There are a lot of little things that can happen if you make the game that close towards the end of the game, which from a spectator perspective, I'm sure it's great. But I wouldn't want it all the time. So that's a long-winded answer on whether rally scoring is the way to go or regular scoring. And I still think I like pickleball the way it is, and I enjoy that when the game is a little bit slower, a little bit more strategic, and I think regular scoring should be here to stay as long as it's still feasible.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I can tell you that as a fan for MLP, it makes it very exciting. More exciting than if we had a lopsided victory, and because it feels like every game, you're never out of it. It's always close. You have the best players in the world, and anything can happen. So that makes it quite enjoyable to watch, and I think that's good for TV, and I think that's good for the sport. But I think it's missing some of the nuance and some of the strategy that seeps in when you do have side-out scoring. How has MLP changed the dynamics between players? Obviously, you have these partnerships that you wouldn't ordinarily have. You're on the Florida Smash. Travis Rettenmeyer, Jesse Irvine, and Georgia Johnson. That's right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and so like on tour, when you're seeing these players, I don't know your relationship with some of these guys normally, but now do you have certain camaraderie? Is there a different relationship?
Yes, I think you totally have to be. And if you're going to have success as a team, you can't just be out there playing as individual players. Even if you have the best four set of players, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to play well together. So having some team camaraderie, but more than that, having the chemistry on the court to where your game complements your partner's game. And that's where, setting your mixed lineup, you have a little bit more flexibility. You're going to play with the other member of your team as far as gender goes. But mixed doubles, it's something when we first arrived to the first event, I had never played with Jesse outside of a couple practice games, and certainly never with Georgia. And same with Travis. So we were like, hey, how is this going to work? Does Travis play with Jesse? Does he play with Georgia? And we pretty quickly determined that Travis was probably going to play better with Georgia, and I was going to play better with Jesse. And we may tweak that in the second event if we're playing certain teams. But that seems to be the better way to go for various reasons, as far as skill set, as far as a mentality and approach. But I think that's huge because the teams that historically have had success in MLP have had really good, solid women players that set up the guys and make them look good, but they make them look good in ways that are complementary to that guy's style. So there's a lot really underneath the surface that you have to sort out, and it's not something that you can easily tweak at times because people's games are their games, that they have different strengths and weaknesses, and you have to maybe change certain things that you would be comfortable doing to make your partner more comfortable. So I think that this comes out the most when I play with Travis because he and I have very different styles, and he has some great shots, and there are certain positions where he thinks that he hit the right shot. And I said, that might work for you, Travis, but I'm telling you that shot puts me out of position based on my game. And there are certain shots that I hit that he maybe wants me to pull the trigger more on, and I have to adapt to that. So I think that's a really interesting part of it, and it probably contributes to more players developing their game because it puts them out of their comfort zone, or it should, because you're not playing with your set partner. I can't play the same way with Travis as I play with Ben, which is probably good for me in some ways. So I think that's really interesting, and especially because we have 12 different teams, have so many different matchups with other team chemistry, and if you play a team again, they may even tweak their lineup. So you have the singles in the background. There are a lot of things going on versus a regular pickleball tournament. You sort of know what's going to happen before it starts because the partnerships are set, and certain teams tend to perform better against other teams, and you don't have the new matchups. So I really think it's exciting and makes everyone better.
Yeah, I think that's part of the allure of MLP is seeing these new partnerships come to life and new rivalries out of that. Do you ever see a day where the PPA might force people to mix it up? Because quite honestly, you and Ben are so dominant. Ben and Anna Lee are so dominant. I don't know if that's great for the sport, or maybe it is. Maybe that dominance is something we should celebrate and keep track of the tally. But I don't know. Part of me feels like I'd be maybe more intrigued if we forced these relationships to mix it up and see new people playing with other people. Do you see that as a potential one day?
Well, selfishly, I'm going to say no. Let's not do that. but I don't think that they're going to mandate anything like that, other than they may have more of the special events. So like the Bubbly Team Championships, for example, in December last year, where they separated us into different teams, and obviously Ben and I were not on the same team. I could see them doing those events more frequently, but as far as your regular tournament format, I don't see them instituting any sort of rule where you can't play with somebody past a certain number of tournaments. I think that at this point, Anna Lee and Ben, or myself and Ben, were the dominant team, and it's up to the other teams to figure out ways to beat that team. There's a challenge presented, and I think that is interesting. And just because we're ahead of the pack right now doesn't mean that other people can't catch up. Everyone more or less has the same resources. So the fact that a team like Ben and Anna Lee can win as much as they do is quite impressive. And it's a little bit overlooked because it's taken for granted after a while. But it's very difficult to do. Just because you have the two best players playing together doesn't mean certain things can't go against you on a certain day. And pickleball games are played to 11. They're quite short. A given match could be over in as little as 20, 30 minutes. So everyone has off days. There are certain conditions that get in the way. If it's windy, if it's indoors, whatever. It's quite impressive for the top teams to win as much as they do, especially when the other teams are always trying to catch up and switch partnerships and things like that.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because I think that when I watch Ben and Anna Lee play, they're not as disciplined as when I watch you and Ben play, right? Anna Lee moves around a lot more. She's a lot more aggressive with that backhand. And that makes it really interesting because it's a different game than you guys are playing, and you're talking about hitting the right shot every time, just kind of wearing them down, putting them out of position, but you're always in position. And I look at the way Annalee and Ben play. That's not always the case. They're a lot more aggressive together. Is
Definitely,
that
definitely. And I think that goes back to really just the nature of mixed doubles versus men's doubles, where certain teams can have success with the sort of style Ben and Annalee play together, but because there's no one to pick on, so to speak, quote unquote, not that it's always true, but typically in mixed doubles, the woman is more picked on. So when Annalee is moving around, she has what you might call a soft target on one of the sides. So you can get away with putting yourself out of position a little bit in mixed doubles because of that soft target. Versus in men's, if we do that and we get, let's just say, stuck on the wrong sides, that's not going to be good for us. Or we just don't necessarily excel when there's chaos as much as ordered control. We know how we play best. We play measured and fundamental, sort of slow, wear you down pickleball, and Ben and Annalee do that probably more than what they get credit for. But they also have a very aggressive skill set, especially with Annalee's backhand. It's one of the most dangerous shots out there. So making sure that she's putting pressure with her best shot so that she's comfortable even when she's not hitting it, I feel like that is also a contributing factor.
so? You play professional tennis. Why do you think we haven't seen more tennis players make the transition over? Obviously, we have a ton of tennis players on tour, but some of the bigger names that have come over recently haven't necessarily found the success that I think either they thought they would or even the general public thought we might see tennis players come in and just dominate.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened. Do you expect it to happen? Are we waiting for certain players to come in that have that skill set, or is it just a time thing?
Yeah, I think that the best grooming ground as it sits right now is still top level tennis experience. And it doesn't necessarily have to be professional tennis. Certainly, someone like a Gael Monfils or Nick Kyrgios look like the perfect candidate. But I also feel like there are other factors at play, something like creativity and willingness to adapt, because you see certain tennis players are a little stubborn to where they're not as willing to accept that the way that they're playing in the beginning is the best way to play. And I actually had an interesting conversation this past week with Callan Dawson, and he and I discussed that the old players continue to win. So, for example, Tyler and Callan got the most bronze medals of any team on the PPA Tour last year, and they've been around a long time. I think Callan's been playing for 9 years, and Tyler something similar. So they're veterans by pickleball standards. And the way that they play is sort of by the book. They have certainly some shots that are flashy. Tyler loves to drive, and Ernie and whatnot. But for the most part, they play pretty disciplined, and they're able to wear a lot of teams down. And the new players that have more flashy shots, um, they're not able to beat a team like that. And we discussed it at more length. And I was like, why do you think that is? And he said that we back in the day would have a smooth fiberglass paddle that didn't have all that much power, so you didn't really have a choice. You didn't have fancy flips and all the stuff that you can do now with the paddle technology and the different athletes that we have. You were forced to play a more disciplined game. It's almost like having a wooden tennis racket versus having a new modern racket. And because of that, we instilled discipline and we practiced things for hours at a time versus a lot of tennis players now can sort of halfway hack the system by learning those shots out of the gates, where they can create a lot of topspin or learn how to drop a topspin faster than what we probably had to do with smoother paddles. So I thought that was an interesting answer by Callan, and I didn't disagree with it. So I still think the best grooming ground are tennis players transitioning to pickleball, but there's another key component to that, and that is that you're willing to adapt and you have somebody who is willing to help you along the way, someone like a mentor. So for me, obviously I had a built-in mentor with Ben. He was already the number one player in the world by the time I started playing. So that was huge. And I was also living in Naples at the time. So Simone Jardim was down there, would practice with me, and I learned a ton from her, Kyle Yates, and Ben. And with those built-in factors, as well as the tennis background, that's what propelled me to play the top tournaments and gain experience and be where I am today. So if you look historically at the players that get good, it's a good tennis background, solid, but they're also living in an area where other good players are, and in many cases, people that have some experience, they can mentor you a little bit. There are pockets around, and somewhere like certain areas of Florida, Wichita, even if you don't necessarily play with those players all the time, just a little bit of exposure to what's possible and what you should or should not be doing is huge. And
Sure.
I feel like those two factors right now are what put people in position to become top players. And certainly, I think that in the future, you're going to have more and more tennis players looking at pickleball and say, you know what, I'm 300 in the world in tennis, I'm not making any money. Why don't I try this pickleball thing? But you look at someone like Sam Querrey, and he may or may not be pursuing it as seriously as some other people, but you start to see the blockades that are in place. Where in the beginning people are like, well, he's this great athlete, he's tall, he's got a great skill set, he's going to come in and dominate pretty quickly. And especially in doubles, it's very difficult because there are a lot of unique sort of nuances and tendencies of top players that prevent someone like that from coming in quickly and having a lot of success. They might make a splash in one or two tournaments, but to consistently be at the top, it takes some time. Even the players that are considered relatively new, someone like a JW or an AJ Kohler, um, maybe like last year or the year before, they were new on the scene, but they had been playing for 3 or 4 years. It was not like they just started pickleball last year. It takes a while to accumulate enough quality experience, and not just quality experience in practice, but against the top players before you have a chance to consistently beat them. So I think all of those things make tennis players great candidates, but it's not a prerequisite per se, but it's really nice to have. And then on top of that, you have these other factors, the willingness to adapt and being in the right pocket of the country.
Yeah. And speaking of the right pocket of the country, you're now in Austin, Texas. How has that changed the way you train and prepare? Obviously, you have a built-in partner in Ben to drill with when necessary. I know you guys are kind of famous for not really even playing rec. You guys just drill, 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 or at least that's the Ben side of it. I'm not sure about you. Do you guys play games, or are you drilling all the time? And how has Austin changed? I know there's tons of great talent. Are you playing with that talent, or is it just you and Ben?
Yeah, we made the decision to move to Austin last year for various factors, but certainly the weather and traveling east and west is a lot easier from somewhere central. Those were a couple factors. The Austin Pickle Ranch, which should be going into place this year. It was in process last year, but we have a place to train consistently, somewhere to travel from. Those were a couple key things, but also just being able to practice full time. Where before I moved to Austin, I had a full time job in Baltimore at Baltimore Country Club as the head rackets professional, and I was working 5 or 6 days a week, except when I was going to a tournament. So it's not like I had all the time in the world to practice. And even though Ben and I lived in the same state in Maryland, he was in school at University of Maryland, and I was working, so we would probably only practice once or twice a week, which is a lot better than nothing. But it wasn't like we were dedicating 3 hours every morning to specific stuff. So I feel like our games have definitely grown. I know mine has since we moved here, just simply by having more time on your hands to dedicate to pickleball in specific ways. And you just sort of take it for granted now. It's like, oh, we get to wake up every morning and go to a private court and work on our games for 3 hours with one of the other best players in the world who happens to be our brother. So that is such an opportunity to expand your game. And it's probably the biggest factor, I think, that we've improved as much as we have in the past year or so. And as far as drilling versus playing, Ben really never plays rec. It almost never happens. AJ Kohler and Deckel are friends of ours, and sometimes when all of us are in Austin, we'll play some games with them. But outside of that, Ben almost never plays rec. He only drills with me, and I probably drill with Ben 90 to 95% of the time, and then maybe on top of that, I'll go and drill with Deckel or AJ, or we'll play some games. Zane Navratil's here, so that happens from time to time. But I also like to play more than Ben, and that's partly my personality, but it's also that he's been playing longer than me, and he plays so much in tournaments. And I feel like that maybe if we didn't have 20 plus tournaments per year, maybe we would play a little bit of rec, but we get plenty of match play just by playing a full schedule. And certainly, like the day before a tournament, I think rec games are good and they're a lot of fun. I look forward to them. Some of the most fun that I have playing pickleball are rec games the day before with your friends, the people that you like, you laugh, you have a good time. There's something to be said for rec. It's a lot of fun. But as far as it being the best for your game, there's no substitute for working on things by yourself and just having a drilling partner to help you along. All right, I think you need to work on this, or or this, especially when it's somebody that has that high level perspective and you can work together towards a goal.
Yeah, especially if you're going to go for the disciplined approach, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like I play a lot of rec that just spins me out. I'm trying crazy stuff. Like, oh, I could try that one time.
Yes.
That's probably not good for me.
No,
Let's get.
in many cases, playing rec with certain types of players will actually make you worse because when you go and try a particular shot that works on that group of players that you play rec with and
Yeah,
you do it in a match and it doesn't work, it's just habit at that point and you
yeah,
get burned on it. And especially when the margins are so small at a high level, you can't afford that. So I'd rather be drilling one-on-one with Ben. And if it works on Ben, chances are it's going to work on most people. And instead of playing with other people that you're not entirely sure if that would work on the other best team. So something like that is something to keep in mind. You can literally get worse by playing rec if it's the wrong set of players. And that seems a little counterintuitive to people, but it's also about your mindset and what you're trying to really cultivate in your game.
so we just all need to drill with Ben, is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, it obviously that's a built-in advantage that I have, but I don't think I can share.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I wouldn't share them either. Let's talk about the technology. You mentioned, the Collin and Tyler playing, the inability back a few years ago to be able to spin balls, to be able to shape balls. And so it was a different game. Today, the sport has changed. And part of that technology is what we're seeing in the things like the Electrum, the Model E Elite. What do you know about it? I know that this is infused with graphene. That sounds pretty cool. I know graphene is this kind of wonder material. I'm not. I think your brother might be a mechanical. No, what is it? A materials engineer.
Yeah, material science engineering. Yeah, that's what he graduated
Right.
with. So he
I
would be
can't
able
even
to tell
say
you a
it.
lot more than me, but I know at least a little bit.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about why that makes the paddle different and what you like about it.
Yeah, the short answer is that it provides more spin. So the ability to generate more spin, typically top spin. Electrum was the first company to come up with the carbon fiber face, which they were ahead of the curve and they had this cutting edge surface. And pretty soon there were imitators, and Electrum has tried to raise their game and not just keep what they have. They had a huge, a high quality product in the beginning and that nobody else had, and then pretty soon the copycats came along and they tried to mimic it. As they say, imitation is the highest form of flattery. But I think that this new paddle with the graphene, as you mentioned, makes the Electrum surface even that much better because it reinforces the carbon fiber. It makes it more durable, a little bit more rigid. So playing with this Elite this week, I noticed a difference where we're going more towards the coefficient of friction rather than pure grit, like roughness. So if you put your thumb over the paddle face, if it feels sharp, that would be more gritty versus if you put your thumb on the surface and try to slide it, it's very sticky. So that's more towards a coefficient of friction, which you're able to spin the ball very much like that, as well as a sharp surface. So I think putting the graphene in there, at least based on what I've hit with this week with the Elite, it seems to be smoother, quote unquote, but stickier. So whether that's something that's good for your game or not, which you're more comfortable with, I can't answer that for everybody, but I certainly know that I was surprised at how much I could spin it, considering that it felt more sticky. Because like typically you're going
Yeah.
to think that, and something's
No, I was gonna say not as gritty.
not as
And to the
it's not as
touch.
gritty, but you get actually as much or more spin. I feel like it's not like the grit is not still there; it's still gritty, but it's smoother than it was before. And on the surface, pun intended, you might say, "Well, I don't think I'm going to get as much spin," but you'd be surprised when you hit with it. You're like, "I'm generating as much or more spin as the original."
I agree, and also it's a beautiful material. Like it was so consistent, and I find that when I touch paddles all the time, and just weird like that. But I find that some areas will be grittier than others, and there's a kind of inconsistency in some of the paddles that I'll pick up. This one, it was pristine. I mean,
Yes.
from top to bottom, there wasn't any discoloration. It was all the same, and that was something unique. I haven't seen a lot of that.
Yes, and the Electrum was the first one to be like all black with the gold. So it's a really sleek looking paddle, and a lot of paddle companies have gone to the black surface, in part because they're all using the same manufacturer, so it's just easier. But I still think the Electrum paddle looks just sleek and cool. And we have the blue around the edge guard for something different with this one, but obviously we still have the black and gold on the surface.
So here's a question out of left field. When are we going to see you and Ben dressing the same? A lot of teams dress the same. I feel like as brothers, and I think that he should dress like you, not you dress like him.
Oh yeah, I couldn't do it the other way. Yeah, sometimes he forces me to wear colors, and yeah, I'm just out of my element. So
Is he colorblind? Can we get this? Is he colorblind?
He is not colorblind. He just
Okay.
likes that style. He's more into that whole the whole clothes thing. Not really my cup of tea, but Ben likes to buy his Lululemon and try to match outfits in strange ways. And you see him in Baby Waters match in funny ways. But I'm not really bought into that. So yeah, like in the last final, we were wearing something completely different. But that's also because we have different sponsors. So you can't always match exactly. Sometimes we can get it right. I think in Arizona we got it pretty good, where it was like North Carolina Tar Heel blue and like red together. We're usually good in those colors. They're more standard, but sometimes he'll be wearing something completely whacked out, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't follow suit on that. I'm just gonna wear something else. But it's a good question. We should get on the same page on that.
It's sometimes I think it might be a distraction issue, and I'm looking into the rules to see if Ben's wardrobe could be a hindrance.
Yeah, if Ben looks like a circus clown, is that a hindrance? It's a fair question.
Right. So the Electrum, going back to the technology of this paddle, it is thermoformed, and we're hearing a ton about thermoforming. And I know that even going back to the original Electrum Pro back in I think 2018, that paddle was thermoformed.
Yes.
So they've been doing this for a long time. What's happening right now with some of these other newer brands in the thermoforming, there are some issues with thermoforming, with delamination. What do we know about thermoforming? What do we know about delamination? And is this going to be an issue with this paddle?
Yes, it's a good question. And like you just mentioned, Electrum has been doing this for longer than the other companies because they were the first company to come out with the Surface. And it is something they struggled with in the beginning to not get the paddle to delaminate when they were thermoforming it. And it was a little bit of trial and error in the beginning where it wasn't coming out perfect. And the trial and error led to them discovering processes where they felt like it was fairly consistent, and you just get better over time. And that's where bringing in new technology like this new Elite comes into play, where they've gone through enough of the mistakes to know, hey, this works, this doesn't. And the other companies, you see that learning curve where the delamination will happen and paddles are sent back, or paddles are coming off too hot. And as we all know, it's a hot topic right now where you have the trampoline effect with the delamination, which I feel like it's almost inadvertent. Like I'm sure some people have discovered, hey, this happens to paddles, and as a side effect, it comes off really hot. So I don't know exactly what everyone's intent is behind that, but certainly you see problems, whether it's too much deflection or not enough deflection, dead spots, things like that. So I feel like Electrum, having been in the game longer than all of these companies, they're not going to run into that issue as much. And making a paddle is no easy business, but definitely you're more likely to get it right when you have experience like Electrum has. And I've only hit with the Elite for this past week, but I love how it feels, love how it looks, and I don't really see you having the same sort of delamination problems from the thermoforming as maybe some other companies may run into.
Yeah, was in the blue edge guard, pretty sleek looking paddle. I've never seen a blue edge guard out there, so I feel like it's pretty iconic.
Yes.
Do you put tape over it?
So the tape that you'll see on my paddles it's usually just to cover up the lead tape that I put on it. So personally, for the paddle that I use, the E, I like the weight in the bottom corners. So they're usually around 6 inches, the strip that I put on. So you'll see typically black electrical tape, which you can't really notice with my current paddle because it's all black anyway. But with this paddle, the one that I used in a match this past weekend would be all blue, but you can see the black strips of electrical tape in the two bottom corners. So that's the only tape that I apply, and that's just for practical purposes for keeping the lead tape down.
Yeah. How many paddles are you going through a month, let's say?
Just because I can switch them out very consistently, I usually use the same paddle for like 2 tournaments, and I'll use that same paddle usually for all the practice time in between. And it's not because the paddle is necessarily worn out, it's that the surface does wear down a little bit, and after a certain period, let's just say 2-3 weeks, I feel like it doesn't perform quite as well as a new paddle would. but I also don't like using a completely fresh paddle. I like to break it in. So I'm never going to use a paddle that I got out of the box the day before. I
Yeah.
want at least minimum of 2 to 3 days to play with it. So that's at least probably 10 hours of play, because I feel like in the beginning you have really good power, really good spin, but the mishits are maybe a little bit accentuated to where it's not as stable once you break it in. And it could just all be in my mind, but that's what I've experienced with my paddles. So I know what that sweet spot is. So play with it for 3 days and then use it for the tournament. And then usually use it the following week for the next tournament, and then I'll cycle them out. That's the system that I use. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're worn out, and your average player isn't going to have,
Right.
20, 30 paddles a year that they're sent for free. So certainly you can use the same paddle and continue to use it and have good performance, but that's where I start to see just that little slip in the performance where I'm going to cycle mine.
Yeah. So this game is all about runs, as you mentioned earlier, and confidence, right? So having the right paddle in your hand, feeling that belief that it is the right paddle, that matters a ton. You and Ben are kind of famous for not taking timeouts when runs are happening against you, where others will maybe be more strategic with their use of timeouts. Why don't you guys use timeouts, and how do you guys communicate? Because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of chatter out there.
Yeah, I think that the answer to both of those is it's almost the same answer. It's that we are so set ahead of time with what our strategy is going to be, and we know what the other one's going to do, that we don't need to talk all that much. And certainly you'll see us talk a little bit in between points, but it's usually small things, where we'll ask each other a question: do you want to change this? Or just something as simple as a reminder: hey, you're getting away from doing this a little bit more than I would like, or where we should hit our returns to right now because one of them's hot. Just little things like that. We need to be on the same page. But other than that, we know each other's games so well that we don't really need to talk out there. And as far as the inclination to not call timeouts is not always the best thing to do, probably, because timeouts are valuable and you should use them. And certainly when I'm coaching people, I'm like, you should use your timeouts, but Ben and I don't. And the reason I think Ben specifically is he views it as a show of weakness, that you're doing something to us that makes us have to respond. And whether that's calling a timeout or changing our game plan, he's more resistant to calling a timeout than making a strategical change, because he's like, it's almost like, okay, you won this round, we're gonna talk it over now and then go back out and to break your momentum. And we always believe that we're the best team, no matter what, no matter how things are going on the court, that we can turn it around and we don't need the timeouts. And sometimes it works against us. Sometimes being stubborn is not the best way to go. But I do also feel like it's a little bit intimidating for the other teams when we look like we're not frazzled at all. Let's keep playing. We still believe we're the best team. And that's part of the reasons that we don't use
but
timeouts.
runs are real, right?
Yeah,
It's like playing blackjack. It really happens. You see it, and you don't want the cooler to come over and shut you down. So the timeout acts as that cooler.
Mm-hmm.
I know that when Ben and Annalie play, Annalie will take timeouts.
Yes.
And I don't know, does that bother him? And if you were to call timeouts, would that bother him? I feel like there's a different relationship.
There's definitely a different relationship. And certainly if your partner wants to call a timeout, you're not going to tell them no. But definitely, Ben and I are more or less on the same page, but I still typically call our timeouts almost all the time. I would say 90+% of the time I'm the one to call the timeout, not Ben. Actually, he called a timeout on his own in, I think, the last tournament. In a defensive timeouts, I would say it's a little bit more equal. But offensive timeouts, I feel like I call them more for our team. But yeah, we're on the same page. Where anytime I want to call a timeout, he's fine with it. And if he calls a timeout, well, I probably thought we should take the timeout 2 points before.
Right. What are you working on now? What are you? Is there anything physically, or even as a team strategically, that you're working on?
Yeah, we're always trying to work on little wrinkles, whether they're combinations or new shots or just showing a different look. Just because you're the most successful team doesn't mean that you won't slip if you don't continue to get better. So we're always looking to add little things. And I guess for myself, I've been trying to add a little bit more of the two-handed backhand roll dink. So creating topspin from the middle on those few middle balls where Ben's not taking a forehand. hitting a more offensive topspin dink is something that I've been trying to do a little bit more often. Doesn't have to be all the time. But if you're a little bit passive these days, people are so good at attacking out of the air, reaching, or off the bounce that if you float it just that little bit, it can put you in a spot of hurt. So using the two hands a little bit more, not just on the counter punches, which I already do, using it more on the middle dinks, the few that I get, that's something that I've been personally working on a little bit.
Do you feel like this paddle has more pop than the one that you've been using?
I would say yes. I have only been using it this week, so I have to play more with it to give you a full answer on that. But my first impression of it was definitely that it had more power. And the surface was definitely something like we talked about with you put your thumb over it, I feel like it's stickier, but maybe not quite as rough as the original. But it also has more power, and the feel to it is different than the original Model E because there's foam injected into this one. So if you like more of an insulated feel, I think that the Elite is a good option because I don't know how that really plays into to given styles. It's more of just a feel thing. It's not that, hey, a power player will like this better, or a field player will like this better. It's more of like, personally, I like the way the ball feels on the paddle face if there's foam in it or not. So for example, the Yola, Hyperion, and Vision, they're almost the same paddle, but Hyperion has foam and Vision does not. So I would say same idea with the Electrum paddles. This has foam and the original does not. And you just have to figure out whether you like the feel with the foam or without the foam. But overall, I would say the Elite, my first impression of it is that it does have more pop.
Yeah, interesting. I had an opportunity to play Ben this past week, and he wasn't using his Yola. He won. He was playing with his Yola. He won 4 games in a row, but then he changed to a frying pan. Had a lot more pop.
He always likes to play with different things. He plays in our driveway with my little sister with a spatula sometimes.
Well, he was playing with a cast iron skillet, and I got to tell you, standing across from him at the kitchen line with a skillet in his hand is one of the most intimidating things I've ever done. I was like,
you
staring
better
death in
get
the
some
face.
glasses on there, Jason. You're gonna get hit.
There was no telling where that ball was going. It was all oiled up, and it was just going to slide right off.
And you get some nice snap with the handle too. You get some leverage in there. There's a reason why you can't play with the frying pan.
Exactly. It was a little nerve-wracking, I got to say.
Yeah.
So, Collin, thank you so much for your time. This is kind of usually the time where we ask, do you have any questions for me? It's okay if you don't.
Questions for you? I don't think so. I think we covered some good ground here. And the long and the short of it is that everyone should go out and try the Electrum, the Elite. I mean, this Model E that I've been playing with the last 2 years is awesome. But I'm looking forward to hitting more with this Elite. The new power, the new surface, the graphene added. There are a whole bunch of exciting things coming down the pike. And whether you play with the Elite or the original, I think that this is just another option for people to explore. And you see the paddle technology evolving across the board. But like we talked about, Electrum's been in the game for so long, they're not going to run into the same trial and error issues as much as some other companies. And I think that shows with the Elite.
I agree. I think that trust is going to be the biggest kind of differentiator now, a paddle that you can trust, that's consistent. Yeah. And so I think that experience from the team at Electrum shows through. So thank you. Appreciate the time. Good luck at MLP this week, and we'll see you down in Daytona.
Thank you. Go Florida Smash.